ॐ भूर्भुवः स्वः तत्सवितुर्वरेण्यं भर्गो देवस्य धीमहि धियो यो नः प्रचोदयात्। ॐ शांति शांति शांति. Namaskar my dear friends, this is third video on Maharshi Ramana's 40 verses on reality. I will start this video from verse 28 onward. The seeking has to be deep within oneself, like diving to recover a precious object that has fallen in deep waters. Like the diver who dives to recover what has fallen into deep water, controlling speech and breath, and with a keen mind, one must dive deep into himself and find whence the I emerges. The basic theme of many of the previous verses, it must have been observed, is the vichara, through which the search for the ego's source has to be made. Deep diving is a metaphor that implies salvaging the ego from the depths of ignorance into which it has fallen, not amateurishly but very expertly and unremittingly, or else success will be sporadic and even doubtful. Bhagwan means that this sadhak's life should be dedicated to realization and to nothing else, for who knows what obstacles destiny will raise against him to bar him his march to the highest in future lives. So he asks us to turn into divers right now, controlling speech and breath. Breath control is equivalent to mental silence, suspension of thoughts, which has to be practiced alongside the inquiry. Suspension of thoughts which has to be practiced alongside the inquiry in order to train the mind to be alone. Kabbalah, thought-free, when it will perceive itself in its natural purity, the mode previous self, whence the I emerges. Verse 29. The vichara is not muttering I, but sinking the mind into its source. Seeking the source of the I with the mind turned inwards and no uttering of the word I is indeed the path of knowledge. Meditation on I am not this, I am that is an aid to the inquiry, but not the inquiry itself. Bhagwan misses no opportunity of reminding us that the quest, who am I, is not a formula to be repeated mechanically like an incantation, but an intellectual activity into the nature of the I, which is carried out until its base is fully grasped and its source is reached. The whole process is dialectical, involving the exercise of the logical faculty till it ends in the silence of the heart, which transcends all faculties. Some suggestive formula such as I am that may be used to being with, but in course of time it has to turn into an unshakable conviction side by side with the stilling of the mind, as mentioned in the previous commentary, which gradually grows in depth and duration. That's why the path of the vichara is known as the path of knowledge, Jnana Marga. Verse 30. On reaching the heart, the I subsides and the real I manifests in its place. Inquiring who am I within the mind and reaching the heart, the I collapses. Instantly the real I appears as I, which, although it manifests itself as I, is not the ego but the true being. What happens to the I which has found its own source and collapsed? The meaning is that the I, which has not been aware of its own reality, has now, through inquiry, come face to face with it and has turned from the notion of being a mortal body to the realization of being the shining sea of consciousness. This is the collapse of the false I, giving place to the true I, which is eternally present as I without end or beginning. We must not forget that there is only 1 second less I, whether we view it as ego totally sunk in the pleasures of the world and in ignorance, or as self, the substratum and source of the world. Inquiring within the mind, who am I, is an affirmation once again that the quest has to be carried out with the mind. Verse 31. Having extinguished the ego, the Jnani has no other purpose in life but to remain immersed in the bliss of the self. What remains to be done by him who, having extinguished the ego, remains immersed in the bliss of the self? He is aware of nothing but the self. Who can understand his state? The purpose of all human endeavors, conscious or unconscious, is the gaining of happiness. The unwise seeks it outside himself in wealth, matrimony, high political and social positions, fame, worldly achievements, and pleasures of all sorts. The wise knows that the happiness that comes from an outside cause is illusory due to its precarious nature and its inability even temporarily to comfort contentment without trouble, fear, and endless anxiety. Lasting, undiluted happiness is one's very nature, and thus within the grasp of anyone who earnestly seeks it. One who has gained this inner beatitude has no further actions to do, nor purpose to achieve. All his aspirations having been fulfilled, his sole preoccupation remains that ocean of bliss which passes the understanding of the common man. Verse 32. Although the Vedas say, "Thou art that," to not investigate into one's nature and abide as that is mental weakness. Despite the Vedas proclaiming "Thou art that," it is sheer weak-mindedness not to investigate into the nature of the oneself and abide as the self, but instead to go on thinking that I am not this. The main point of this verse is that when the Vedas tell us that we are in duty bound to conduct an inquiry into ourselves in order to experience the truth of it and abide at that, or the self, rather than just mechanically thinking that we are not the body but that. Investigation and meditation will eventually rise above the body thought and will reach the Tanumanasi state, the rarefied mind, through which the pure awareness can be directly apprehended. This is the silent heart itself. Verse 33. Self-knowledge is not a duality. The self being single, it is itself both the sub-object as well as the subject. It is ludicrous to think I know myself or I do not know myself, admitting thereby to selves, one of the object of the other, that the self is only one, is the experience of all. To know a thing is to create a duality, the knower and the known. But in self-knowledge there can be no duality, the known being the knower himself, the object, and the object being one and the same identity. It is common experience that the I is unqualified and single. It is neither divisible into parts nor tainted by qualities, however fat or lean, old or young, learned or ignorant, rich or poor, whole or dismembered. One may be, one is aware of oneself only as I, devoid of any attributes. The bare I, I is the primary cognition of everyone, preceding the mind cognition, the body and all its appurtenances and all its thoughts. This shows that the self is non-dual, homogeneous and indivisible, and can abide pure by itself with no thoughts to disturb it, being itself not a thought but the intuitive recognition of oneself as the eternal knower, the pivot, more correctly the substance of all one knows. It is evident that the I, being pure indivisible consciousness, is experienced by the jnani as the same in all. Verse 34. Disputing the nature of the self without attempting self-realization merely constitutes delusion. Without trying to realize in the heart that reality which is the true nature of all, and without trying to abide in it, to engage in disputation as to whether the reality exists or not, or is real or not, denotes delusion born of ignorance. The theme of the previous verse continues. The realization of one's self is the realization of the true nature of all, as the self being single and homogeneous. Disputations deepen the ignorance and not infrequently lead to acrimony, anger, hatred, and jealousy among the disputants, not to speak of the vanity and arrogance they create in the hearts of the winner. They should thus be shunned by seekers of truth and of peace everlasting. Verse 35. Thaumaturgic powers are like dream magic. They do not entrap the self-realized. To seek and abide in that which is always attained is true attainment. All other attainments, such as siddhis, thaumaturgic powers, are like those acquired in dreams which prove to be unreal on waking. Can they who are established in reality are rid of illusions be ensnared by them? Sometimes we dream that we are flying in the air or leaping over precipices hundreds of feet wide, or stopping a running motor car with a light touch of the hand, or doing things which in the waking state would appear miraculous yet prove unreal on waking. The siddhis exhibited in the waking state appear to man who has freed himself from illusion exactly like the dream miracles. Utterly false. The greatest of all miracles and all siddhis is the discovery of an eternal abidance in oneself. In the olden days, occasionally a siddhi mad youth used to come to Ramana with the intention of using Bhagwan's presence to promote the success of his pursuit of siddhis. One or two of them were reasonable enough to listen to advice of the devotees and quit the ashram before it was too late. But one more persistent than the others continued to interfere with his uvula and posterior membrane of his tongue, ignoring all advice to desist, until after 2 or 3 weeks his people had to be called to take him away. These were lucky to be saved from the pitfalls of siddhis. Many others had their siddhis turned on them like boomerangs, adversely affecting their physical and mental constitutions. Siddhis come naturally to the very few due to yogic practices carried out during their previous sadhanas and karmic determinations. These people are safe and sometimes helpful to humanity if they behave reasonably in the sadhana of this life. They are likely to attain mukti if they are lucky and favorably disposed sattvic. In other words, that which is always attained refers to the self which is always present at the true nature of the ego, whether ego is conscious of it or not. See comment on verse 30. Before the birth of the body, during its existence, and after its disintegration at death. Verse number 36. It is not necessary to go on meditating I am that, for one always is that. The thought I am not the body helps on to meditate I am not this, I am that, and to abide as that. But why should one forever think I am that? Does a man need to always think I am a man? We are always that. Verse 32 discourages the use of the thought I am not this. However, this verse avers that even the negative meditation is useful to the extent that it leads to the positive meditation I am that. But even the latter meditation appears to the jnani superfluous in that it is already granted that one is always that. That which is always attained, verse 35. That we are not the body, any thinking man can discover for himself without even attempts at self-realization. For what dullard can find no difference between himself and, say, a chair or table which does not move, think of, speak like him, yet is made of the same elements. There must certainly be something in the human body over and above what there is in the other objects. That something is life or mind or knowledge or that. Verse number 37. Non-duality prevails always, whether as the world or as the self. The theory that in practical life duality prevails, whereas non-duality prevails in the spiritual attainment, is false. Whether one is still anxiously searching for the self or has actually attained it, one is not other than the 10th man. Non-duality always prevails, whether viewed from the viewpoint of the world or from that of the realized yogi. The realization of self cannot turn the dual into the non-dual. The truth of non-duality stands eternally true, as verse 1 has shown. The 10th man refers to the story in which 10 men traveled together. After fording a river, they decided to count themselves to make sure that none of them had been lost in the crossing. The man who counted his 9 companions forgot to count himself, which resulted in their starting a search for the 10th man. Actually always present as the counter himself, the same applies to man who is always present as the eternal non-dual reality but imagines himself always in duality due to his perception of multiplicity. I and you, the chair, the door, the window, and a million other objects. But the realized man is free from this false imagination. He knows himself to be the 10th man. Verse 38. The sense of doership reaps the fruits of action, karma. Karma ends when the doer realizes his true nature. So long as a man feels himself the doer, he reaps the fruits of his actions. But as soon as he realizes through inquiry who is the doer, the sense or doership drops off and the threefold karma comes to an end. This is the final liberation. Who is the doer? If the body is the doer, then we have to attribute intelligence to it, an intelligence which it does not possess. The identification of the instrument of an act with the actor is the cause of much trouble. An illustration will be to the point. A man has a grudge against another man and plans to do away with him. He waylays him on a dark night, takes a stone and kills him with it. Who is the killer? Certainly not the stone, although it is the stone that has done the evil deed. Nor is the hand which holds the stone, nor the body of which the hand is a part, and which is as insentient and bare as innocent as the stone. It is the mind which with hatred planned and executed the crime using the instrumentality of the body and the stone. Therefore, the mind is the empirical man or ego who, so long as he believes himself to be the actor, has to reap the fruit of his actions effected through a body. But this belief, like the ego itself, is not permanent. It passes away immediately an inquiry is made into the identity of the doer. The triple karma which hangs around the neck of the doer is made up of the sanchita, accumulated karma, the prarabdha, the karma which is destined to be worked out in this birth, and the agami, the karma which becomes active in future births. The last class of karma will remain unfulfilled in the case of the person who has attained liberation in the present body and who will have no other birth for karma to be worked in. Questions are sometimes asked concerning the Jnani's prarabdha as to why it does not cease with his attainment of jnana, thus sparing him suffering that may arise in the form of virulent disease with which some famous Jnanis are known to be burdened. The answer is that prarabdha of the Jnani had been allotted to him at or before birth when he was still liable to the working of karma prior to his attainment of jnana. As for his suffering, it is not as painful to him as it appears to others. It is greatly mitigated by the realization which increasingly wells up in his heart. Some biblical-oriented Westerners seem to think that the suffering of the Jnani is due to his taking upon himself the sins of his disciples. Vedanta denies to transfer of sins and its responsibilities. Strict justice is the law of karma which tolerates no one to suffer for another's crimes, least of all a guru who comes to show the way to truth. Far from being punished, he is rewarded by the service, love and devotion of the disciples. Thus the belief is a salvation through the vicarious suffering of the master is totally unacceptable in this path where each man is regarded as working out his own liberation through hard word, self-purification, worship of the Guru, self-control, spiritual practices and a full sense of moral responsibility. In the whole Vedantic literature, one does not find a single reference to the transference of sins, but always to karma. Verse number 39, bondage and liberation are mere notions in the mind. They cease when he who is bound in is inquired into and realized. Bondage and liberation exist so long as thoughts of bondage and liberation exist. These come to an end when an inquiry is made into the nature of he who is bound or free, and the ever-present and ever-free self is realized. This has a close resemblance to the last verse, which makes the sense of doership to be the cause of karma. Likewise, the sense of being bound or free makes bondage and liberation exist. Thus, wrong notions about oneself are responsible for all the acts of destiny, birth, death, bondage, ignorance, etc. But wrong notions can be rectified by right knowledge, which can be had only through an inquiry into the nature of the person who is the victim of wrong notions. Then his real self will reveal itself and will dispel all notions, all senses, and all thoughts, including the sense and thoughts of jivahood, individuality itself. Verse 40. True liberation has no form and destroys the very ego which distinguishes between one kind of it and another. It is said that liberation is with form or without form, or with and without form. Let me tell you that liberation destroys all three as well as the ego which distinguishes between them. All these forms of liberation, some of which are said to take place in a disembodied state in some supersensuous words, Vaikuntha, Satyaloka, etc., are hypothetical. At best, they offer encouragement to the sadhakas who are partial to them. The fact of the matter is that true and absolute liberation results only from jnana, knowledge of the absolute, which alone can destroy ignorance either in this body or in one of the following bodies, for there are no planes or states of consciousness where radical salvation is possible other than the waking state. That is, in a body where bondage and ignorance are felt and attempts for redemption made, least of all in the state of after death where there is nobody to feel the limitations and retributions of karma. Therefore, he who aspires to reach the highest has to exert himself hard here and now, preferably by the Vichara method which Bhagwan has so graciously propounded and so often reiterated in these verses. The determined sadhaka will not fail to verify these truths by his own experience if he puts them to the test full of confidence in his own self and unfailing silent support of the master who is not other than the very reality he is so earnestly seeking, and whoever and ever abides in his own heart as existence, consciousness, and bliss, Satya Chitta Ananda. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. So here ends this wonderful video. Thank you, my dear friends, for watching and listening this video with patience and with great devotion. Please like, comment and share the video and subscribe the channel. Thanks a lot. Namaskar, my dear friends. Namaskar.